Welcome to Afterthoughts, everybody. I am your host, Michael Dixon. Very excited to be here this week to talk about one of my favorite fucked up old westerns. With me, as always, Ryan King. How's it going, Ryan?
Good. I have an important question, but I feel like we need to introduce the movie before I ask, because otherwise it's going to come out of left field.
Okay. We'll get back to you on that one. Also, John Garcia is here. What's up, John?
It's good to be with you, Michael.
Wow, you're doing an Eastwood impression and you called me Michael.
That's right. I'm going for the two. You know, I got a Job going.
Michael.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this fucked up shit you had us watch.
All right, cool.
Okay.
John, you're used to much more fucked up shit than
I was
this.
debating going to see Marquis, that French movie where they have penis puppets that talk to people, but I watched this instead. You ruined my fucked up night.
You want it to be more fucked up than 1973's High Plains Drifter, starring and directed by the great Clint Eastwood. That is the movie we're going to discuss tonight.
A drifter came riding out of the West. You know him as Clint Eastwood. The citizens of Largo didn't know him at all.
What did you say your name was again?
I didn't.
Fear was in their greeting. Murder was in their minds.
We were talking about hiring a gunfighter.
Yeah, we don't know anything about that fella there. Who is he? Where's he come from?
You don't want to get shot. You don't want your shops or your houses burned. You don't want your women touched. You don't want anything to happen. Except you're afraid to do anything about it.
That stranger's got everybody in this town at each other's throats.
One man against one town. Not bad odds.
About time this town has a new sheriff.
I'm the sheriff.
And the mayor.
I'm the mayor.
Any objections?
We hadn't done a Western on this podcast, and I was kind of jonesing to watch a Western, so I decided to pick this movie. We have done an Eastwood movie before, also picked by me, Dirty Harry. So yeah, really tapping into like college Dixon vibes with these Eastwood picks, but very interested to hear what you guys think about this movie. So I think like introducing this movie, I think it's kind of interesting to talk about very briefly the history of the Western in America. You know, you have like pre-World War II, the Western is a very straightforward genre about good and evil, and you know, the pioneering spirit of the white people in the West and the, you know, the evil savages and the good guys and the bad guys, and it's all very clear moral tales. After World War II, you have film noir coming in and influencing a lot of cinema, including the Western. And you have Westerns that start to be a little bit more ambiguous, start to have heroes who are a bit more complicated and flawed, like John Ford making The Searchers and other films like that. Then you have, evolving or devolving perhaps from there into the spaghetti Western with Sergio Leone and the clear anti-heroes and, characters who are not good, but it maybe still have some sort of moral code that they abide by. And then, you know, Eastwood learned a lot from Leone in those movies. And then he was like, here, hold my beer. And he made High Plains Drifter. Probably the most fucked up Western that I've ever seen. This movie was written by Ernest Tidyman, who also wrote Shaft and The French Connection. So yeah, very accomplished novelist and screenwriter. And Eastwood found the script and decided to make it. This is the second movie that he directed after Play Misty for Me, which Ryan talked about in a previous Recommend or Refute episode. But this was the first Western that he had directed, and you can really see the influence from Leone in this movie. You know, it is about a lone gunman riding into town and fucking shit up in the style of A Fistful of Dollars and other spaghetti westerns of that ilk. High Plains Drifter is like, there are no good guys at all. Like every single character is absolutely rotten to the core, completely selfish, doing things that are only benefiting their own self-interests to spite everyone else around them. It is, it's kind of a hard watch at times, but it also has its moments of comedy that are pretty funny in parts. And I think it's pretty shocking that this movie can actually get you to root for Clint Eastwood's character despite all the terrible things that he's doing on screen. It's really almost like an Old Testament fable about like communal evil and corruption and the ability of societies to commit vast amounts of evil or to ignore horrific evil acts that are happening in their community, a la slavery, the Holocaust, things like that, kind of distilled down into a small town community. I think the story is pretty fascinating. So I'm excited to dive into it. From a filmmaking perspective, this thing is absolutely gorgeous. I watched this on 4K from Kino Lorber, and it looked fucking incredible. Just, shot in this little desert town on the edge of a lake. They built the town from scratch to make the movie. It looks really great. The score is incredible. It's almost like a cross between a spaghetti western score and like a horror movie score. It's very eerie, and it really kind of sets the tone really well for this movie. So yeah, I'm interested to hear what you guys think about it. We'll dive more into this, but I really like High Plains Drifter. I will never forget the first time I saw it because it's so fucked up, and I was not expecting what was about to happen, and seeing the things that the protagonist is doing in this movie and how evil they were kind of shocking to me at the time. But I think the movie is pretty interesting because of that and the ideas that it is putting forward. So. Ryan, I'll kick it to you and see what you thought about this movie here.
My question is, what year did movies stop being rapey? Like, I want to know that line where it, like, stop being
97?
okay.
No way,
Because
2000.
there's definitely it just feels like if we go back a certain amount, there's just like
Mhm.
an uncomfortable scene, and then I would like, obviously,
They're really
agree. What's
enjoying
interesting-
being out from under the Hays Code at this point. They're doing whatever
yeah.
they want. Yeah.
Yeah, there is an interesting way to look at this in Eastwood's character being terrible, right? That's kind of like
Mhm.
what makes this interesting, is that he's sort of a terrible person, and it gets it across
Sort of.
Yeah,
fairly
sort of.
quickly. Well, I mean, he's straight up terrible. There's like a mild retribution, revengey spirit angle thing.
Yeah, but
But,
like it's not justified what he does. Like,
Not fully. He doesn't meet violence with the same level of violence
No.
that it's brought to him. He definitely takes it up a notch.
This is John
but
Wick, you killed my dog. Now I'm going to murder 38
Actually
people.
murder everyone.
Yeah. Mhm.
Horribly. The second girl that he's with is where it gets that like 60s and 70s rapey, kind of what we saw in Rocky, where it's like, nah, you really
Mhm.
want it, force a kiss, and
Yeah.
then we're good
Yep.
with it, kind of feeling. And I'm like, I'm not sure when that stopped. And I agree. People would like to be like, oh, the modern era, but I'm like, nah, early 2000s. It still feels like they were very questionable things.
Yeah.
And I'm not
Yeah.
sure when someone was finally like, yeah, this is fucked up. Let's just stop being like that way. And maybe it's not gone fully.
I don't
but
think it's gone. I think that I heard rumblings of it when I was in orientation at UT. I remember I saw a play where somebody was reenacting that kind of act, and the guy 3 rows next to me leaned over and was like, "She should have been giving it up anyway." And I was like, "Holy fuck!
Okay,
like, why
yeah.
is this still there?"
That's very disturbing, but that was also quite a long time ago, John.
That don't you make
Yeah,
me
sadly.
feel old
Sadly, it
on
does
this
feel
podcast
old
where we're
now.
talking about a 70s movie?
Yeah.
Anyways,
And it's definitely that, like, there's a time period, I feel like this, like 70s and earlier, where it just like that's the norm. Like, anytime we go back and watch any movie this era or earlier, there's always one like really uncomfortableness about the men's and women's roles in these. But
Mhm.
so High Plains Drifter is interesting. It's middle of the pack Eastwood Western for me. He gets better as well. Like, I feel like he adapts in his westerns from here even better. This is relatively derivative in the style of making it, where he just is like, all right, here's the spaghetti western people I've worked with before. Now I'm going to make my spaghetti western, but not really take necessarily new jumps in the style, which spaghetti westerns just all fucking copy each other anyway. So it's not like,
Sure.
or samurai movies or whatever, right? So it's sort of like spaghetti westerns are kind of like whatever. You're lucky when you get a Leone that really is different.
Mm.
He is a deplorable character, which makes it uncomfortable to watch. and you do just kind of come away with like a okay kind of feeling. Like, I guess that's it. Um, Darla watched with me and said it was a complete waste of 2 hours of her time.
No, it was a complete waste of an hour 45 of her time.
No, yeah, sorry, 2 hours. That's fair. Yeah, she did watch it all the way through, so there's also that. Like, there's always a certain amount of she doesn't fall asleep or not care about it. This was
Yeah.
enough where it's like she was engaged, but she rightfully hated the character. This does fit that mold that if there isn't a character Darla can identify with, she really doesn't care for the movie, and there really isn't
Yeah.
anyone that you should identify
No,
with.
I would
Yeah.
be very
in this movie.
concerned if there was someone in this movie that she did identify with.
Right. Yeah. There's nobody that you should. So I think it's interesting to look at it from that angle of like what exactly is going on, what exactly is the revenge tale. This is kind of like not a glorified revenge tale, which is an interesting take. Movie wasn't particularly popular as it came out either. It took a bit to kind of grow to some level of following in Eastwood's legacy. But yeah, like we can dig more directly into it. But John,
Yeah. So I did relate to one character in this movie, and that's the barber, because my hands always fucking shake when I'm trying to shave. Like, I'm just nervous.
That guy's fucking awesome.
Yeah, he is. But yeah, I enjoyed this movie as fucked up as it was. I have two lenses I look at it through that made it way better for me in how I enjoyed it. And one is I looked at Clint Eastwood like a vengeful fucking spirit. Who just descends on that town, and everything fucked up he does, even though it's not justifiable, it's just one of those like supernatural things where, hey, there's something out there that'll come and just fuck up your town if you're like a cesspool of corruption.
He's like all 10 plagues in Exodus coming down on this town.
He doesn't need 4 horsemen. He's the one who fucking just rides in. And so looking at it through that lens, I was like, all right, there's something here, like, because from the get-go, I just was like, holy fuck, why is he just rolling into town, murdering people and like raping a woman and all this other shit? And then as like the kind of town crime started to unfurl, I was like, oh, okay, everybody here is awful. Got it. This is some weird punishment thing. And then the other lens I looked at was Clint Eastwood, trying to find himself, his voice as an artist, and trying to create this separation between the man with no name from the spaghetti westerns of Leone and what he wants to do. And I feel like this is a great way to sever that tie. I obviously I haven't seen things after that he's directed in the Western genre, so I don't know how far he takes it in any direction. But I feel like this is that thing where he's saying to his audience, like, you love me as this character, now hate me as this character. I want to make it clear. Because I think about other actors who get typecast, and Clint Eastwood is obviously one character who can be typecast into like any kind of gruff dude with that Clint Eastwood face. Like, he can be anywhere. And he's just, whether it's on the streets of San Francisco or it's in the Wild West or modern day, he on a front porch somewhere in Gran Torino, like he is that character. And to see him actively try to sabotage kind of his ego and put himself into like the lowest of the low sort of activities, I was like, okay, I can definitely dig this. Like, while I don't get on board with a lot of the shit that's going on, it's really fucking uncomfortable to see it. I really did like it. And the score too. It was something that I noticed. It stood out. It wasn't the typical like spaghetti Western score.
Mm-hmm.
It had a much more experimental vibe, especially when things towards the end started to get chaotic. It felt almost like, it was like rock and roll sort of in the guitar riffs and everything that was going on. I was like, there's like wind chimes that come in at some point and like these
high pitched strings that are really creepy.
It's almost like a thereman. Yeah. It feels so experimental, and like he's playing with all these elements to see what kind of emotions he can evoke. And yeah, I really liked those parts. I watched it with Sasha. Sasha did not say it was a waste of an hour and 45 minutes.
Hey, I'll take it.
Yeah, Sasha instead was like, well, that was fucked up. And she was asking questions. We were kind of like talking a little bit back and forth during the movie's progression. We, of course, both rolled our eyes whenever characters made allusions to or jokes about the rape that took place in the movie. We were both just like, oh, fucking whatever this is. We even predicted the second time we were like, oh, she's going to sleep with him because he's too cool to resist or whatever the fuck. So yeah, like those moments, we rolled our eyes. The rest of it, we were kind of in awe of how fucking bold it was. And we were both just completely bewildered by what the fuck the plan was to begin with for any of the movie. Of him being like, I need 250 gallons of red paint, like all this other shit. It was like really funny towards the end. But yeah, so I dug it. I really did enjoy it.
Nice. Yeah, Ryan, to your point about like this feeling like a derivative spaghetti western, I think it does in a lot of ways, but I think the way that this like innovates is by just taking it to like a way darker place than any spaghetti western had ever dared to go, and like just really like painting the frontier West as actually this horrible place full of evil people that are committing all these terrible things. And like, you know, we America, you know, back to the, you know, manifest destiny doctrine has thought about, you know, oh, this wonderful ideal of colonizing the West and seizing this land that is rightfully ours, given to us by Jesus Christ himself. And this like wonderful pioneering spirit of taking risks and going out and making something of yourself and all these things, when these people are actually stealing land and raping and murdering and doing all these things to like create chaos and hell everywhere they go. Right. And I think the movie isn't directly talking about like native genocide, but it's talking about, you know, how the West is not this place that should be glorified and thought of as this wonderful part of American history. Like, it's actually super fucked up. And, you know, you think of a small Western town like that as this wonderful place. And that's how those people think of themselves, which I think is really fascinating. How all of these characters, especially the hotel owner, like he thinks of himself as such a good, upstanding person, you know, and the preacher and the mining company owner and everybody, they think they're doing like just a wonderful service to everyone around them. And, you know, if they have to commit some sins here and there to make that happen, then like that's fine because they're in pursuit of the greater good. And actually they're stealing minerals from the government and they're like, you know, murdering people and sending people to prison on fake charges and covering it up and doing all these things that they say are in the name of having this good, prosperous town that is like a God-fearing people. And they're actually all terrible and they deserve horrible shit to happen to them. And like Eastwood's like angel of death coming through and committing all these terrible things. I think it's just a fascinating reframing of the American Western and how America has thought of the West and pioneering and colonialism up, you know, through that point.
Yeah, it's clearly a deconstruction of like the myth of the gunslinger. Because yeah, to your point, spaghetti westerns, they glorify a lot of the violence that happens in them, and you have even your anti-heroes, even me thinking of like Django, who just like walks through town and ends up shooting a bunch of guys, and sure, he maybe like takes a woman by force, but they don't really linger on those moments. They use those moments as like a caricature to be like, this is some cool shit, isn't it?
And they usually have the anti-hero do one or two nice things. So you like Eastwood in A Fistful of Dollars, he's like, he helps that woman and her kid like escape, you know, like there's usually one or two things where you can like, okay, like he's not all bad. He's got a nice heart deep down.
Yeah.
In this, he doesn't outright do anything super nice, but he is like more ambivalent to the Native and Mexican characters in the movie that everyone else shits on.
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
Like, but not, he doesn't necessarily save them in the fate of, like, he didn't care if they would get shot by the shootout or anything, right?
I feel like his nice acts toward them is just punishment to everyone else. Like that's how it serves the story.
There's a balance. Well, he didn't invite the Mexicans to the fiesta, Ryan.
That's true.
He spared them.
He made
party.
them build the tables and then didn't invite them. Yeah,
yeah, that's
that
right.
Sounds like that sounds about right for the time.
They then hear later that they got to take apart the fucking the dude's barn, which I'm sure was kind of satifying if that guy was ever a dick or something to them.
Oh, you know that guy was a dick.
Absolutely.
The hotel owner, my God.
There's no way he wasn't.
Yeah.
But yeah, like there's those, I think about even the serials of like the 50s to the 60s with you get this interesting transition, because I think that like the heavy, which is, you know, the term for the villains of the week in those shows, they roll into town and they're gruff and they're bad guys, and they roll up to the bar and they take whiskey from whoever the fuck they want to, and they kill the innocent people of the towns, and it's up to like the white hat cowboy to come out and fucking shoot them. But then you get that evolution into the spaghetti Western where those villains become kind of the anti-heroes because they've got a heart of gold just a little bit. And then you have this, which I think takes them to the next level where it really is pushing like, no, like there were no good cowboys at all. It is that deconstruction. And it is that like anybody in this is going to be terrible because the Old West was fucking garbage. Like you just were forced to be greedy and try to scramble over resources and stuff. And so I think that is really fascinating. And that was one of the things when I was watching it, where even though I was really put off by characters, like there is nobody I can relate to or emotionally connect with. There were moments where I glimpsed what it was doing technically for the rest of the genre. And that's why I can understand why audiences did not like it. Like mainstream audiences would probably not have been as hype on this movie.
It didn't fail. Like it did well enough where Eastwood kept making movies.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. It wasn't a total bomb, but I could see it definitely being one of those.
I think it's like against
major
Dirty
success.
Harry and Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Like kind of the bar that Eastwood set to come in a little cooler.
Yeah,
I think I agree that it's kind of that. It's not necessarily as clear or as well done, I think, in being that I can think of as like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And both of that and this are almost like college poster movies. I feel like there are a lot of people that watch this and are just like, oh, he's badass.
Yeah.
But in that movie, like they're cowards, they run away, they just are malicious, violent, and that's it. Those are the characters that we follow, and then they die. And everyone around them is honestly pretty horrible too, right? It just paints a completely like just horrible picture. Where this one, I'm like, there's the hint of like, oh, he does a bit more to the really bad guys that are like, all right, and he's back for some kind of revenge or some sort of force versus it just being like, and with Django, there is just sort of the like everybody's fucked up feel too, right? I think even like the more modern stuff like Bald of Buster Scruggs? How's that
Ballad
go?
of Buster Scruggs.
Ballad of Buster Scruggs. That one's one where everyone's just terrible.
Sure, but that feels different. Like that's a Coen Brothers movie. That's kind of its own thing. Yeah.
But it is a play somewhat on Western tale. I think it's especially the Buster Scruggs bit, right? Where he's this like sing-songy classic Roy Rogers singing cowboy, but then it's like he's deplorable and then he just dies. Like,
yeah. And maybe to fill in the gaps, if you haven't seen High Plains Drifter, you should watch it. But like, kind of what we're talking about here is, Eastwood comes into this town, and within the first 10 minutes of the movie, he's murdered 3 people and raped a woman, and like he's just doing all this horrible shit. And the townspeople approach him because he has killed the only 3 gunfighters in town who they have hired because they are worried about these 3 guys getting out of jail and coming into town to exact revenge, and they need somebody to protect them. And it's implied that basically they have set up these 3 guys on some phony charges to go in jail to kind of take the rap for a murder that was basically committed by the community at large, where they have murdered a U.S. Marshal who had basically caught on that the town was operating a mine on government property and basically stealing government minerals and profiting from them. And the whole town was in on the murder of this marshal. They've thrown these 3 guys under the bus to go into jail. The 3 guys are getting out of jail, going to come exact revenge on the town, and they need protection. So Eastwood has killed those 3 gunfighters, and now they're like, we'll give you anything you want if you just stay here and fight off these guys from us. And he uses that to just fuck with everyone in a really fun way. Like this is where like the humor comes in to the movie, where he's like, really, you'll give me everything I want. And he just starts going around town and like fucking with every business owner and taking a bunch of free shit from them. And like he makes Mordecai, the little person, the mayor and the sheriff of the town, and everybody gets super pissed off. And it's just like, he's like the ultimate troll for a big portion of this movie, where he's just fucking with everybody in town and getting as much as he can out of them. And like it's just everybody in this movie is so fucking evil. Like you can't get behind and root for anybody, but it is fun to see Eastwood just destroy these people's lives when like they are just evil to the core. And it starts out with like good natured, how I'm gonna fuck with you and get some free cowboy boots, and then it turns into like just destroying the town entirely. But yeah, so that's kind of what we're getting at, and like this is talking about, this is super dark, and where this is going with the genre and how it is kind of painting everybody in the West as evil.
Yeah, Sasha called that moment when they go on the shopping spree the Pretty Woman moment of the movie, and I thought that was hilarious. It is interesting because when you're talking about like that all the people in this movie are evil, in your experience when you're watching it, they are not presented as evil initially, like they unravel into that.
Right.
And it becomes this interesting nuanced difference between vulnerable and cowardice, where initially
they're evil and
movie,
cowardly at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean that's where like I think that there's a boundary line between when you're vulnerable and when you're a coward. Like because cowardice is actively like embracing your vulnerability and like trying to not, I don't know, I don't want to get too philosophical about it, but there is a clear difference here in like the way that Western stories are told, where a hero comes into town or an anti-hero, and the town is full of people who are vulnerable no matter what. They're not cowards. Some of them may try to stand up to the bad guy, but like nobody in this movie will try to stand up to anybody.
No.
And that is just pure cowardice. And it's all brought about by, it's this facade that is masking around as like honest vulnerability of like, we're just simple folk. Like we can't do
these are good God-fearing people.
Yeah. I love the way that I didn't know they had a Canadian priest in that town, the way he said God all the time. But yeah, like, and then there's those moments where they'll be kind of tip of the hat, like reveal things. Like even when there's a scene where the man with no name, the fucking vengeful spirit with no name,
the stranger is
the
credited,
stranger. He basically kicks everybody out of the hotel who's there, and the priest is like trying to appeal to him about it. And he's like, these are your brothers and sisters, huh? And I guess you won't mind if they shack up with you in your house. And like the priest is like, all right, everybody, don't worry, we'll find you room and board and not a penny more than what you were paying at the hotel. Like that moment where it's just like, it's not free though. You fucking pay your shit. You stay with me. Yeah, it's those little moments, those jabs that tell a tale beyond the rest of the movie. So
yeah, that line's great. There's also there's a scene in the film where Eastwood is talking to the wife of the hotel keeper, and she's like, "You're dangerous, and you make people afraid," and that's like that puts everybody in danger around you. And he says, people are only afraid because of what they know about themselves inside. And it's like, yeah, these people are evil and cowardly, and they're terrified that they're going to be exposed. And he's coming in and calling them on their shit, and it's freaking them out.
Yeah.
He is the true man with no name or stranger in this movie. I like, people always say the Man with No Name trilogy, but he has names, and those movies are completely unrelated.
Yeah.
Yeah, they call him like Blondie and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And
he and like Joe, and like he has a name in each one, some sort of name. Is it really his name? Whatever you could get into. Like this one, he never says his name.
Yeah, and people try to get it out of him. He dodges that pretty expertly.
Yeah. Mordecai, the little guy's like, I love that character. Is so funny to me. He just like sees Eastwood as like the new guy that's going to be in charge, so he immediately tries to get on his good side. He's always offering him cigars and going to fetch shit for him, and he like lights a cigar for him after he kills those three guys in the barbershop. And he's like, "What did you say your name was?" And Eastwood goes, "I didn't."
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, one of the things I really like about this movie is the cast of characters in this town. Like, I think one of the things that Eastwood does really well as a director is that he casts people with very distinct looks that can fit a specific role very well. Like the barber, like I will never forget that guy's face. He's just such a weird looking dude. He has a horrible comb over, which I think is hilarious that the town barber.
Yeah.
It's like the worst haircut that I've ever seen. And there's so many characters in this movie that I'm like, where do I know that person from? And I look him up on IMDb and like, oh, it's from a different Eastwood movie. That guy's in Outlaw Josie Wales. That guy's in Every Which Way But Loose. And like he would cast a lot of these guys in different movies because they would create such a unique kind of vibe as a character and get the exact type of weird person he was looking for in a bit role.
Yeah.
It's also interesting to note that his stunt double plays the murdered marshal.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Interesting.
Yeah, which is an on-purpose decision to be like, they vaguely look similar, to get that, like, okay, how is he related to the martial feel? And I think he's had his, and he wanted to put his stuntman on camera, I guess, right? Like, give him a shot.
Yeah. And his stuntman did a good job being whipped to death.
Whipped
I
the
think
shit
it
out of
was
him. Yeah.
a pretty convincing whipping. I don't know how many other movies I can compare it to. Where a man just gets whipped in the streets for a really long time, like
For
an
a long
uncomfortably long
twice.
time.
Yeah.
That scene is really well done too, because like there are some shots of him where you're like, oh, that's Clint Eastwood, and other shots where you're like, no, I don't think it is, and it's like you're not necessarily sure whether it's him or not. And I think that plays really well into the story, where you're like, okay, and when he first rides into town, everybody looks at him really weird, and you're like, do they recognize him? Like, do they? Is there something in the back of their heads that's like, there's something familiar about this guy? Why don't I like this guy? This is making me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's introduced that first time we see that scene, he lays down to take a nap, I guess. And we start to hear the weird music. We talked a little bit about that, but the really like trippy, yes, much more like a horror movie ghost kind of vibe music. And then it sort of flashes back to that whipping and then comes back to him and he wakes up. So there's that sort of like, why are we seeing that from his viewpoint? How is it related to him?
Right.
Did it really happen? Like, it takes a bit to put that together.
And even before that, when he rides into town, he hears the whip crack on the freight.
Yeah, and it makes him
nearby.
jump.
It makes him jump. Yeah. So he's like, yeah, all those little breadcrumbs left in for you to kind of piece together what's going on. And that's, I think, another thing that I really like about this is other Westerns are very grounded in that the heroes are the heroes, that there is not, I don't remember many other Westerns from that time that have the kind of spirituality that this does, where there's like almost a supernatural element to it. Like, there's usually, you know, hey, it's the pioneers and the frontier, and like they're getting fucked up because things were hard back then. Not they're getting fucked up because there were vengeful ghosts here or potential vengeful spirits that are going to just like make you fucking eat it because you did something terrible. And I like that twist on the genre as well.
Yeah. And a lot of times, like if there was spirituality in a Western, it was positive spirituality about, you know, Christianity or whatever. And, or if it was a dark Western, it would be the lack of spirituality, right? Like, actually, this religion isn't going to help you. But with here, like, it's like, no, the darkness is spirituality. Like, it's coming back the other direction. And like, you guys are going to pay for the sins you've committed.
Yeah.
There's spirituality in El Topo. I don't know what it is.
That is true. There is a spirituality there. Yeah, I think about like some of the spaghetti westerns. Usually when you see a church in those, it's occupied by like the bad guys or the bandits, or there's some kind of organization that's using it because the priest has been run out of town or already killed, or there's some aspect of it that's just not present. So, yeah, this one, I want to see more like this. I want to find more westerns that have this. And I feel like it's not something that's done in modern time either. Like I can't think of anything else.
Yeah. Eastwood made a similar Western, like I think 13 years later, called Pale Rider, that is also kind of a brings spirituality into it in a creepy way. It is not anywhere near as dark as High Plains Drifter, but it's also very good and worth watching for sure if you want to like explore more into that vibe.
It's interesting because I think in the true Old West, spirituality was pretty important, but even like ghost tales, ghost stories, especially because the West was an intermingling of so many different cultures, unlike what these movies often show of a bunch of white people. It actually was a place where people of different backgrounds, male, female, you know, local, foreign, could intermingle and get a job or get land or what have you. There also were then that blending of cultures and these ghost stories that certainly were around, of like ghost trains and ghost, you know, cowboy coming back, and the myths of like, oh, is Jesse James really dead? Or, you know, is this his burial? Is that his burial? Right. There are always those, but you're right. You don't really see that represented in the Westerns.
People like to ground it. They like to ground it, and they like the grit of how realistic it was. Yeah, you shoot a man in the gut and he dies. He never comes back. And if he does come back, then it's like melodrama. and there's like you're supposed to be dead, and like he's some ghostly bullshit, or they'll do like a Blumhouse thing and it's just awful with like a bunch of thriller stings in it and shit. And yeah, it's disappointing. I want to see more.
Well, and there's no
in this.
mystery to us as the audience. Like we know,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's
we know
none
he
of, like,
crawled under the building and then put the plate of armor on, and like we saw all of it.
Yeah. There's none of that. I want to. Do you mind if I just real quick?
Hey, go for it.
All right. I was thinking about Paul Schrader.
Okay.
And I really,
John, I don't mind if you bring up Paul Schrader. I'm never going to mind.
I know you're not going to mind, but I didn't know how like off the rails in the old 1800s we could get. But I was just like, Paul Schrader ever done a Western? I would love to see something by Paul Schrader that does this too. Because I know Paul Schrader's whole style is a man in a room wearing a mask. And when that mask is a gunfighter's mask, I would love to see something Schrader could do for like an old West town. But yeah, so like this, I don't know, this movie, it's just that effect. Like me thinking about Schrader and what he could do with it. This is like something that I haven't seen Clint Eastwood do before, and a piece of Western genre that I haven't seen. And it inspires me. It makes me like really curious what else you can do beyond just the plain deconstruction of the myth or a postmodern interpretation of like the West. What are these other aspects that you can play with? Like, what are things out there? So I think it kind of speaks to how different this movie felt for me when I was watching it, just because of that jarring aspect of how dark it is.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think maybe why a lot of Westerns don't go this way with dark spirituality and things like that is because it's such a good setting to tell a horrific story through just the uncaring, horrific nature of nature itself, right? And like, you see a lot of times in dark Westerns, just people breaking down because of the harsh conditions around them and their inability to deal with those things. And that lack of God and the force of the wilderness around them is kind of what drives the darkness of Westerns that want to go in that direction for the most part. And I think those are really interesting concepts that you can make a really fucking good movie out of, and it's already there, it built into the setting. So maybe that's why not a lot of Westerns have explored the kind of dark spirituality as much.
It's just easier to pull from fact than from fiction in a sense.
Yeah, and like especially if you're shooting on location, it's all right there, right? Like you can just use what you have as the malevolent force in the film.
Yeah, I am curious in terms of. So talking a little bit more down along that line, like I would love to brainstorm with y'all. There were some ideas I had when I was watching this movie where I was like, oh, I don't even know how it's going to fucking end. Like just the amount of like insane choices that are hard to discern what the stranger is trying to do. And it got so dark at one point that I was like, the stranger's going to just be shot and killed. Like I thought it was going to go that hard into how kind of brutal it was with all of the characters. I was like, all right, he's going to come in and he's going to kill everybody or get the whole town killed in some fucking way. And then he's going to turn around and get shot. Like it's the last undercut because he's been a great shot up until then. He fucking absolutely nails every headshot he ever goes for. Mm-hmm. And at one point I was like, is he going to decide to let himself be killed as like the final note? Because he knows, like I thought maybe the bad guys, the brothers, and I can't say the bad guys because everybody in this fucking movie is the bad guys.
Yeah, the three guys that broke out of, or that have been released from prison that are coming to enact
the boys who are welcomed home.
Yes.
Yes, the boys who are back in town, as the song goes. I just thought at some point he would like let one of them shoot him fatally because he would have shot them and they would bleed out and have the most gruesome fucking death in the middle of the West. And it would be that kind of like depressing ending. But then it didn't. He just kind of rides off and the town is in shambles and like it's way more of like I wouldn't say it's a smack on the wrist. It's like something way more severe than that, like chopping off the wrist. But the town has definitely learned something, or at least been punished. And he left. And so I was like, what are like the other ways that a Western could go? What are things that like to build upon this, like my Paul Schrader imagination and all of that? What are things that y'all would look for in a Western? What are things you would want to see if there's another one made soon?
That's a very big if.
That is a very big if.
It's interesting that it's a genre that has really lost its popularity. Every once in a while, something pops up, and even I would say something like Bone Tomahawk.
I haven't seen that yet, but I've heard.
Yeah, a little
So
bit
much
of the
better.
elements, not the like anti-hero revengey stuff, but some of the it's not a classic Western, and it
Mhm.
does play more with the horror genre. But the things that are most like Westerns now would be like No Country for Old Men,
Right, which
right?
isn't
It
really a
kind of plays
Western, but
yeah, but it
it's
kind of
close.
uses the beats of a Western and some of the like filming aspects of it. And it is that tale of kind of an unstoppable violence in a place that's like, filled more and more with violence and crime. And it explores that without it being like a guy on a horseback. And I think it's just the like disillusionment or what illusionment or whatever. What would you disillusionment? Is
Yeah,
that a word?
disillusionment. Yes, that is a
Um,
word.
with the concept of the American West and the fact that it's only American West is only really anymore a fascination for Americans. It's lost its appeal in Europe even. So kind of like, why would I necessarily make a Western movie when I know my audience isn't really going to watch that, but I can just take all the same beats and do something else with it.
That's why they started
Yeah.
making like Cowboys and Aliens, Ryan. Because they
So
were
Yeah,
there
that's
was the
just the
Magnificent Seven
ultimate.
remake with Chris Pratt that was really bad.
Oh, yeah. The
Yeah, you're just
ridiculous
into the
Six
complete
parody that was
satire
also
bullshit
equally
versions.
bad.
Yeah, that movie.
Ugh.
Yeah, I mean, and I think like the Western basically evolved into the crime movie, right? Like it turned into the gangster movie, the cop movie, those kind of things.
Yeah.
Right.
And we don't have as many movies set in the rural West anymore. But I love Westerns and I love returning to them. And so, every couple of years I go on a Western kick and like watch a bunch of old Westerns because they don't really make new ones that much anymore. But yeah, I mean, John, to your question about like what are other ways that this movie could have gone. Um, I think most people in this movie actually didn't learn a lesson, right? Like I
Not at
think
all.
the woman who moves away learned a lesson,
Get the fuck out of that town.
and that was about it, right? And I think that the ending to me I thought worked really well because it was just like he's fucking them up and like not killing them all, but like destroying their livelihoods and like shattering the dreams that they had in going west and creating this town. And I think that is probably the worst thing that he could have done to them, like them kind of being stuck there without a way to like rebuild and achieve the dreams that they wanted, and just kind of leaving them to just sit with it and see if they could actually learn a lesson and maybe change their lives from there. So I thought the ending worked really well. I don't know where else. Like I feel like that is how I would have. That's like I think that's maybe the best outcome. I don't know that I would have had a lot of notes on ways that they could have done it differently.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, my question was less about like how could it have ended better, because it ended better than I expected it to. I thought it was
Yeah.
going to end very fucking dark. My question
It
was
did.
more like, yeah,
Kinda is, yeah.
my question was way more like, what do you look for now in like a Western genre? If there was something to come around the corner, what would you be anticipating? Which, like to Ryan's point, is there's an evolution and there's less
Yeah.
of those genres now.
Yeah.
But like, there's only so much you can do with a small town. Like, what is it that comes between that? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how many. I think about to take it a little bit into the video game territory. I think about the Red Dead Redemption games, which came out, that are all like sort of picking apart the same kind of deconstruction of the myth. There's some characters in those games where like you get involved in like the Mexican Revolution, and they have, a sort of a figurehead for the Mexican Revolution that's running against the Mexican government. And when you're trying to help him, everybody tells you he's like the greatest guy ever. And when you meet him, he's a drunk womanizer and he's a piece of shit. And like, there's those bits that it plays with where it's like, he's a buffoon and he's leading like an army against the Mexican government, which is also a bunch of authoritarian bullshit, like autocrats. And so like, that's stuff that I don't know if I've seen, because it's been caricatured in a lot of spaghetti Westerns and it's not dealt with as much in terms of the Western movies I've seen, that like Mexican-American relations.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see more of. To the extent we have movies about that, it's like glorifying the Alamo and stupid shit like that.
Yeah.
That like, it would be interesting to have a movie that was looking more clear-eyed at American Mexican or Texan Mexican relations, and kind of painting that in a darker, more accurate picture would be pretty interesting. I think Django Unchained too is a good example of a modern Western that is not actually a Western. It takes place in the East, but it's like, it is of the Western genre, and it's taking that idea and moving it to a different location and having this like revenge fantasy dealing with America's sinful past in a way that Westerns hadn't really dealt with before.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think if I really wanted to see a deconstruction that hasn't been done with the Westerns, I do feel like you still continue to have every once in a while a Western here or there where it's kind of like everybody's deplorable, everything's awful.
Mhm.
The core appeal of Westerns is the core appeal of Americanism, what I feel like it reinforces, which is being an individual and like taking what you want, what you do is more important. Even these like fantasies of the good guy coming into town and cleaning up, he's an individual that comes in and is just badass and does everything.
Mhm.
Right. And he usually has these ideals, this sort of American picket fence, unrealistic ideals that we supposedly have. Right. And then somehow everything is, better. He's the new Marshall and he fixes everything and gets everybody on the right path. But like a deconstruction of the West as this like actual free area and independent area where the individual gets better than they had before. If it's kind of like more showing like everyone comes away worse, everyone learns worse habits, like, and any individualism that anyone has just harms everybody. And you can actually see that impact of like, as soon as somebody does something, it just ruins other people's station. And then that inevitable like chipping away. This movie doesn't quite get to that. There's some hints of like, he sows some discontent among them. And there's, some bickering, but it never gets to the point of like, they don't trust each other, or it, sort of the bonds of society break down quite.
Yeah, he turns them against each other, but they still corroborate and like collaborate together to try to
just now
overthrow
against him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Less
It is
of a-
interesting though that High Plains Drifter is more about the community than it is about the individual. So it is kind of,
it does hit a little, yeah.
Yeah, it's looking at things a little bit differently there.
But he's still a badass that can,
he can shoot
pull out
people
his gun
immediately.
and
Sure,
Yeah.
but he is exposing the community as a whole, right? And like the moral
Right.
tale is about the failings of the community, not about the individual and any one of their like decisions in that process, right? It's like
Right,
just as
yeah.
much about the people that sat there and watched as it is about the people who murdered that marshal.
Right.
And maybe another one, and maybe this exists, but I just haven't seen it. But it feels like this should exist at some point, like a movie from the Native American perspective about like Western colonization would be pretty fascinating to see. Like just like straight up painting white colonizers as evil, and just having the movie from the perspective of a Native American tribe as people are moving in and taking their shit would be pretty fascinating to see.
Yeah.
Not Pocahontas.
Not Pocahontas though. Not that.
I haven't seen the Terrence Malick version, so maybe that's
yeah,
good.
Maybe.
But yeah, I mean the Disney Pocahontas, no,
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would hope. It feels like we're on the cusp of a little bit of a movement there with Reservation Dogs
Mhm.
and Prey, right?
Yep.
Both of them
Mhm.
actually having native people, native language, building those movie, TV shows, and the fact that we have Children of the Flower Moon coming up.
Yeah.
Killers of the Flower Moon, yeah,
Killers
Yeah.
of the Flower Moon. Hopefully, like a little bit of recognition there raises the public's interest of like, okay, what was it really like? What did really happen? Like, let's actually. This is me imagining that Americans are going to truly give a crap about these problems. It's been thousands of years and we haven't.
Yeah.
So what but it would be nice if
Thousands.
there was a little bit of that like following of like, okay, now we have these tales. Let's hear some more. Less Yellowstone and Yellowstone side tangent things that don't get it at all.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
God, the amount of times I've been told to watch Yellowstone.
Oh, so
and I
many
just
times by
don't
very
want.
old people.
Yep. And I just
Yeah.
don't. I have no desire.
I want to talk a little bit more about the end of the movie. We kind of hinted at it, but I think the end of this movie is so it's so good and it's so visually striking. Like this movie is beautiful and it really shows Eastwood's developing eye as a director, and it's very much taking visual cues from Sergio Leone films, but it just looks absolutely gorgeous. Every scene is framed really well, and it's really well shot. Getting toward the end of the movie, he keeps taking things from the town and he's like, we need a bunch of picnic tables and we need an entire roast cow and 200 gallons of red paint. And he will never explain to anyone what it's for. He just like, this is what we need. And then finally, like on the last day, he is going out to track down the three guys that have gotten out of jail. And he just leaves the town with the 200 gallons of paint. And they're like, you want us to paint everything? And he's like, yep. And the pastor's like, surely you don't mean the church. And Eastwood's like, I mean, especially the church, which is just a great line. And again, kind of like on the nose about the moralism of this movie. But, he goes out and deals with those guys, fucks with them for a bit, gets them mad, then comes back into town, and the entire town is painted blood red, every single building. And it's just an incredible visual. And you see when he rides into town at the beginning of the movie, this gorgeous landscape with this picturesque little town on the edge of this lake. And then he rides back in again, and it's just painted completely red, everything in the town. And it just pops off the screen. It looks great. And it's just a really cool idea, I think, in a movie. And then he the bad guys come in, Eastwood just leaves and just lets them wreak havoc and fuck with everybody in the town, start shooting people and killing people. He makes them paint a big banner that says welcome home boys, which is so funny to me. Like, it's just, he's fucking with them in every way he can. Like, he's damaging their pride more than anything else, right? And I think the way that all unravels, like the kind of the final prank of the movies, is just so good.
Yeah.
They did a really good job painting. Like,
yes.
when you get in there, I'm like, wow, they got to the detail and everything. They weren't lazy.
The one moment in the movie where Sasha was like, bullshit. There's no way all those townsfolk could paint that shit so good. I was like, hey, you never know.
I think too, it shows how cowardly these people are, because like anything he asks, like, paint the entire town red, every single fucking building this morning, I'll be back. And they do it to a very like good degree. And I think one of the buildings, like the top wasn't painted. I was like, oh, that must be where that was the 200th gallon.
Stop, yeah.
They ran out. But I think it just shows, and you see these people just caving to him more and more as the movie goes on, just having an inability to stand up for themselves. Even if they hate doing it, they still do it, right? And they may throw a fit and make a scene about it, but they still cave and give him everything he wants. And it just shows that these people have no courage, no morality whatsoever to deal with their own sins that they've committed, to even try to like just stand up against these guys that they have wronged. They won't even fight their own battles, right? They have to have somebody else do it for them. And they just want to sit back and act like they're these wonderful moral people. What? Get guns? Well, we couldn't shoot anybody. That would be mean. It's just, I think it plays into the characterization of these people really well.
Yeah.
Talk about the setting for a second. We mentioned it earlier, and then kind of mentioning the view of the lake. Eastwood found this location. It's in California. It's a large, like, beautiful lake, kind of out of the way. And they straight up built the town. And these are not, sort of a traditional facades, and then we film interior somewhere else or do it,
No, it's all shot on location. You can tell because they all the buildings have windows, and you can see out to the landscape very clearly.
Yep. And there's several, like, they walk in a building and you can tell it's the building, right? That they just made the buildings and the sets and everything. And then they legit paint them red.
Yeah.
For it.
And blow them up.
Slowly destroy some of these buildings. Yeah. But I appreciate that, to give the town a realistic feel. Like, it just does work in the perspective and the sort of reality of this, tiny little town, that I think sometimes the other Western, I know a lot of the Westerns use these ranches that are out here around me that
Spawn
are all
Ranch.
facades. Exactly. Spawn Ranch is not that far. And there's just these facades, that they get a couple shots down the middle of the street, but we don't zoom out to show this huge lake in the distance because it'll immediately ruin the illusion.
Right.
But here we get some broad landscape shots that are really pretty. And this lake is, it's actually such
a
a
big
decent
lake.
sized lake. You just
Yeah.
don't really see the end of the lake that they're next to. I have no idea where that mine is. That's one minor complaint. Like,
Yeah, they say they're a mining town. You're like, where's the
but
mine?
where
Yeah.
and how does it work?
Yep.
What are they mining?
I would
Yeah.
think that with
Yeah.
all that dynamite, the stranger would just blow up that fucking mine too, just because. Why not?
Yeah, good
Yeah,
point.
just to cap it off. Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, I heard the studio wanted for it to be on a set. They were like, hey, we should build this. And
Yeah.
Clint Eastwood just insisted.
He's like, no, we're doing this on location.
Yeah.
Which really paid off. Like this movie would not have
Yeah.
the weight that it does, I think, if it were shot on a set somewhere.
And unsurprisingly, Play Misty for Me, he shot in Carmel by the Sea. So he definitely is I want to go on a location. Like he's not
yeah.
interested in filming in lots, which a lot of like Dirty Harry, that is San Francisco. So much of that is shot in San Francisco. The spaghetti westerns are shot on locations. There's shitty locations they get, but they're
Yeah.
locations. They're out there. And when you look back at the like John Ford westerns,
Monument
that
Valley and
yeah, they have this big feel to them because they're on those locations. The TV shows like Rawhide, where Eastwood comes from, have
Mhm.
this just small scope, right? And I think he wanted that more realistic Wild West where there's no one else out there but them.
Yeah. Also, the bartender was the cook from Rawhide. I was like, who is that? Oh, shit.
Yeah.
That's the guy. Yeah.
That is one thing I love about westerns is how many they're just people who are just western actors.
Yeah.
That's
They
all
just
they
only did
do.
westerns. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. One of the things I appreciate of Back to the Future 3, better than Back to the Future 2, I'm a Back to the Future 3 apologist,
Yeah.
that they pull in legit old western actors into their western setting. Just appreciate that.
Yeah.
Gotta give it up.
The last thing that I had on my list to talk about was John Wayne's reaction to High Plains Drifter.
Yeah, I saw that.
The hell is all this crap, Pilgrim?
So Eastwood really wanted to work with John Wayne, and he had a script that was called The Hostiles, that was about like a young cowboy who had like won half of an older rich cowboy's ranch in like a poker game or something, and they had to like, they didn't like each other, but they had to learn to get along to like fight off some enemies or something. And Wayne said no to the script. He sent him a second version, and Wayne, like a reworked script, sent it to him again. Well, how about this? And Wayne wrote a sternly worded letter back to Clint Eastwood saying that he hated High Plains Drifter and that he would never work with the guy, and that High Plains Drifter does not reflect the pioneering spirit of the American West. And Eastwood was like, it was a fucking fable, it was a Bible story, basically. Like this wasn't like, trying to talk about like, the actual pioneering or anything. Like it was just, and Eastwood was like, I realized he was from a different generation and we were just never going to understand each other.
Sorry that I hurt. Dear John Wayne, I'm sorry I hurt your fragile masculinity with my fucking movie.
And then he sent him a third version of the script for Hostiles after receiving that letter, and Wayne threw it in the sea.
Wow. Did he
Didn't read
film
it.
himself doing it? Is he that?
Like Job hurling a letter into the sea.
Yeah. Did he burn his Nikes after? Who knows what John Wayne did?
They finally did meet in person because Don Siegel made The Shootist, which was Wayne's final film. And, but right before he died from like nuclear fallout because of that Genghis Khan movie that they shot at like a
Jesus.
nuclear test site.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of things wrong with that. But
It did not do well by the Genghis Khan spirit.
but because Siegel was shooting the movie, he invited Eastwood to the set, and Wayne would only agree to meet with them because he asked about Eastwood's politics, and he learned that Eastwood was also conservative. So then it was okay. So they could he would agree to meet the man.
That is the most John Wayne fucking thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, just incredible shit. And it's kind of amazing that like Eastwood has kind of assumed that like role in American society at this point. Like nowhere to the degree that like Wayne was like naming commies to the McCarthy and shit, like horrible things. Like, you know, he was a much crazier than Eastwood's politics. But, you know, now Eastwood is the old Western actor who doesn't understand modern generations and talks to empty chairs at RNC rallies and things like that.
And then weirdly accidentally makes liberal movies. I always find that strange that he has
Right,
several
yeah.
movies that don't fit.
I mean, High Plains Drifter is like very critical of American exceptionalism and westward expansion and pioneering and all these things where, you know, like you would not think that is reflective of what he believes. And maybe that's not what he was intending with the movie. Like he said, like this was basically a fable. I wasn't meaning to, you know, say things about the Western spirit or whatever. And so maybe that's just coming out of the movie as things that, you know, he wasn't intending, but they're definitely there.
I mean, that's the thing with art, though. That's why, like, King
Right.
Kong is not just the story about a fucking giant ape that gets brought to America in chains. There's like a racist component to it, and there's a real undertone
Yep.
to what's being talked about. And it's one of those things where, like, the art that you think you're making is not the art that you're actually putting out. It's
Nope.
the full public perspective is going to reveal exactly what you're fucking trying to say, whether you know that you're saying it or not. But yeah, like it is ironic that it's not ironic. Clint Eastwood was conservative to begin with, but it's just one of those things where it's like, well, this is the natural progression, I guess. He'll carry the torch. Maybe he'll get an airport named after him too. Who fucking knows? But yeah, that's one of the things is like, I just can't stand John Wayne anymore. I was actually talking to somebody from Brazil about John Wayne recently, and they had no idea who he was.
Oh, wow.
Or like what his movies were about. And I was like, oh, his movies are all bullshit, man. Like John Wayne, don't get me wrong, some of them are great. But like John Wayne in general,
he has been in some very good movies,
really
and he's been
fucking-
very good in some very good movies.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's a terrible person.
the undertones of John Wayne, they're always
I always think it
there.
was interesting. I wanted to look back and see what Wayne had to say about the Searchers. And I know there
Yeah.
was a making of then too, because I'm like, he plays a deplorable person.
He does.
And that is a movie that kind of paints everybody as pretty awful. That then he would be like, oh no, I don't like this movie that doesn't glorify Westerns. Or I'm like,
I
no, the
disown
Searchers
this.
does not. Like that's
Yeah.
kind of the end
No.
of the Westerns.
Yeah. I may be bringing this up later in a recommend or refute episode, but yeah, I'm gonna put a pin in that conversation. We're gonna
Okay,
circle
all
back.
There's the teaser.
I just said circle back. I apologize profusely.
Corporate seal.
I know. My God. Yeah. So, anything else that you guys want to talk about with this movie? I feel like it's just so fascinating to me because it is so dark and fucked up and so different than any Western that I've seen. And yes, there are pieces here that are ripped straight from Leone and spaghetti Westerns, but I think what it does and where it goes is just so fascinating.
Yeah, I don't have anything other than I think we should get to the recommending part.
Yeah.
I left out
Yeah.
the refuting part, but
Ryan, anything else you want to add?
No, yeah, I think, but yeah, for like recommending, I'll talk about it where it falls in Eastwood like films for me.
Yeah, get into it. Where does this fall for you?
Yeah, this is a recommend. I feel like it needs a little bit of, you need to have kind of seen some Westerns to get a feel for it. If this is like your first Western, you're kind of like, all right, well, this is weird. I'm not watching any more Westerns if this is what they're like. And I think this one, to me, it falls a little middle of the pack because I think that by the time he gets to Unforgiven, like Unforgiven is just so good, like all
Mhm.
together, and gets some of the points of this. Like there isn't the like ghost element of it or whatever, but there is kind of the like everybody's a little terrible or a lot terrible in there. And then obviously like Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is just also excellent. You know, peak Western, peak spaghetti Western. And I would even say like as a director, I think then he moves from this. I'm not sure if it's his next Western, but when he gets to Outlaw Josie Wales,
Love
I
Outlaw
think
Josie
that's
Wales.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's even kind of better in this time period
Mhm.
of Western. So this one's kind of like, well, he's got a little bit better kind of that he's done in each of these other categories. That's where this one kind of falls to that, like next up in your Eastwood research, I guess.
Yeah.
Interesting. John, what are your thoughts here? Recommend?
Yeah, I'm absolutely a recommend. I would say, yeah, to Ryan's point, I don't know that this is the first Western you should rush into. I think that it requires an understanding of where Westerns came from, at least seeing like one or two Westerns before and being like, coming into it, I had the exact same approach that I think most people would and should, which is Clint Eastwood in a Western. Oh God, he's gonna be a badass that can't miss a shot, and he does all this good shit for
But
everybody.
he's so good at doing that.
Yeah. No, that's exactly the point. Like you come into it, and to my point earlier about him making this something that maybe distances him from that typecast of the spaghetti western, like that for the fans. But here's what I really want you to, I want you to hate me after you loved me. This is what that movie is. It's I would say like maybe the third western you should watch if you were going to try to like do a marathon, do like a classic, then a postmodern, then do actually this, and it would fuck your shit up in a great way and make you think
Descents
about
down into literal hell.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's like my recommendation for it. I recommend it no matter what. I'm sure if I recommended it to somebody who went in blind, they'd be like, what the fuck? But also, it's not an experience you're going to find anywhere else. And I really hope that there would be more in this line of kind of spiritual revenge on the frontier. I would definitely look forward to that. And Paul Schrader, if you're listening to this, which if you were, I would be so flattered. Please write something in the
Paul
West.
Schrader, we'd love to have you as a guest on the podcast.
Yeah, Paul Schrader, we will fly you out, okay? Spare no expense except for a hotel. We will put you up in one of our places.
Anything you want, Paul. Anything. It's coming.
We will not charge 1 cent more than hotel rates.
That's exactly right. But yeah, I would recommend this. Dixon, I already know what you can say.
Yeah, I love this movie. I would definitely recommend it. As far as where this falls in Eastwood's westerns, I think like there's movies that he has acted in and movies that he has directed, right? And like I like the Leone westerns are like the best westerns that have ever been made, in my opinion. And like I don't think this is as good as those. But this might be my favorite of his directed westerns, actually. I think like I love Outlaw Josie Wales. I like Unforgiven. I'm not as high on it as a lot of people are. But I think like just the boldness of this movie and where it goes and what it says about American society is so fascinating to me. And it's so beautifully made, and I think it's pretty damn great. I also really like Two Meals for Sister Sarah, as far as like an American Western that he's acted in. Shirley MacLaine is great in that, and that one's a lot of fun. But High Plains Drifter is really good. I would definitely recommend it. I think like, I will recommend it with some caveats. Like there is one straight up like rape scene in this movie that like doesn't shy away from it. And there's another like very rapey scene in this movie where like, he is convincing a woman to have sex with him when she clearly is not interested. And it's like there are things that like are uncomfortable. And if you don't want to watch that, I totally understand. I think I don't think the movie is like saying that kind of behavior is okay. The movie is using Eastwood's like chaos and violence as biblical punishment upon this town, and it is that's one of the forms of the punishment to this town that occurs. So I think it's like that's the way to look at it, I think. But I understand if you don't want to watch this movie if it has stuff like that in it. So
yeah, I felt bad because I'm so desensitized now that I was like, I've seen worse. It was I mourned the person I used to be.
Yeah. Too many giallos and spaghetti westerns.
There are just too many other exploitation films for me.
Yeah.
The movie is dark and heavy, but there also is quite a bit of comedy in it and some light moments. And the kind of the joy with which Eastwood fucks with the town is very fun, I think. So it's not like you're just in for a hour 45 of this is super dark and fucked up. Like
Get your Schadenfreude hats on.
Yeah, there are lots of light, fun moments in the movie as well. So
nice.
Cool. Well, we've got a round of recommends for High Plains Drifter. So, go out and watch it. It's available to stream on whatever the tech monopoly you prefer, or buy the 4K Blu-ray from Kino Lorber. It looks fucking great. I have been your host, Michael Dixon. With me, as always,
Ryan King. I've been trying to paint my bathroom and bedroom, and I'm so many coats in that I don't buy. I need the people from this town to come paint my stuff in an afternoon. And
how many gallons have you used in your bathroom?
200.
It takes for one room, it takes like 2 gallons of just the undercoat, like just the primer before I even get to the color.
They didn't use primer.
Yeah, they didn't use primer. Perfect. It looked great.
You could see like the signs of like, it would say like blacksmith coming through the red paint. I thought that was funny.
Oh my gosh.
And
John Garcia, I'm glad that we could be talking about the best Westerns and not the hotel's The Best Western on this podcast. We're not sponsored by The Best Western, and we never will be because it's a fucking terrible place. Much like the Frontier.
This corporate rant brought to you by John Garcia, not sponsored by the Afterthoughts podcast.
Hey there, movie buffs, TV toughs, and all listeners in between. John here from the Afterthoughts podcast. I just wanted to drop in at the end of this episode and say thanks for listening. If you've got afterthoughts of your own to share, hit us up. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at The Afterpod, or jump into a conversation on our Discord server. You can find info for this and more at theafterpod.transistor.fm. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.